في وقت تتصارع فيه القوى الكبرى على النفوذ في قلب القارة الأفريقية، وتروى فيها القصص عن أفريقيا من خارج حدودها، يبرز صوت مختلف، صوت لا يخضع لمنطق الوصاية ولا لإملاءات المؤسسات المالية أو الإعلامية الكبرى. ضيفة حوار برنامج المنطقة الرمادية تأتي إلينا من جبهة الوعي والتحليل الجريء لتهز بعض المسلمات وتكشف النقاب عن الدور الخفي الذي تلعبه أجهزة المخابرات الغربية، ليس فقط فوق أرض أفريقيا بل وتحتها في السياسة والاقتصاد والأمن. بيبا لوتون باحثة ومحللة جيوسياسية بريطانية من أصل جنوب أفريقي، تنتمي إلى مدرسة فكرية مستقلة تنحاز لقارة أفريقيا وحقها في تقرير مصيرها، كما تدافع بقوة عن حق أفريقيا في التنمية المستقلة، وتشدد على أهمية التصنيع والبنية التحتية والطاقة النووية السلمية بوصفها وسائل للتحرر الاقتصادي الحقيقي.
Ms. Bieber Lawton, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Ms. Bieber, many humanitarian NGOs claim to provide relief, yet the Great Lake region remains trapped in cycles of violence and poverty. To what extent do these organizations contribute to maintaining the status quo rather than resolving the root causes of instability? Are they more focused on crisis management than long-term solutions? And if so, what is your take on claims that some of these NGOs are profiting from prolonged conflicts?
Well, I would say that the NGOs, and within the NGOs, I include the human rights industry, the humanitarian complex. I would say that NGOs market the poverty that neoliberalism inflicts on countries, and we're talking Africa, so there's plenty of that to see. So when we look at what neoliberal economic policy has done for the past 60, 70 years, and reduced economies to failed states, we then have the NGOs coming in and they are effectively marketing a product. They're marketing a byproduct and they're making money from it. I'm talking, of course, of NGOs, higher up the food chain. There are NGOs who perform good works and do many good things, but those ones which are politically expedient are there to market what I would term the misery industry. And it is actually it's $1 billion industry. The money that goes through this is just unbelievable. So I like to use that term. They market the poverty, they market the suffering. Neoliberal policy it really is a system of Malthusianism. And that whole concept of Malthusian policy came from a British reverend back in the late 1800s, a chap called Reverend Thomas Malthus. And he, very unchristian in his views, he said that in order to keep the population at a controllable level, they had to keep people in poverty so that they died young and they died of diseases and what have you, malnutrition, and then they wouldn't exceed the desired level of population. So extremely unchristian approach. But anyway, that mindset was picked up and implemented by Henry Kissinger in his famous National State Security Memorandum 200. It's called NSSM 200, or the Kissinger Report, in which Kissinger and others like him, Brzezinski, said that it was a matter of state national security for America that the third world be kept impoverished so that they would never use the resources that were necessary for the North. That policy's still alive and working. Getting back to the NGOs, because we are, another thing that I just wanted to add, they work in very nefarious ways. It's a very specious industry. They look great on the surface, and inside there is rotten as rotten can be. And just to expand on the concept of, so moving on from poverty and suffering, food aid, what have you, the whole concept of energy. And you think, okay, well, energy, the ability to produce electricity is the backbone of any economy. So it's vitally, vitally important, especially for African economies wanting to industrialize, that they have sufficient energy and the means to produce it. And just think lately, over the last several years, how many NGOs, and in my mind, I've got one in particular, which is a German NGO called Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. They were very active and still are in South Africa. And how many of these NGOs attacked fossil fuel use and nuclear energy being used not just in Africa, but throughout the world.
Excuse me, when you say attacked, you mean verbally criticizing or physical attacks?
Verbally, but literally an attack. And when you realize that what they are doing, they are not attacking fossil fuel use or nuclear energy use. They are attacking a country's ability of its industrial capacity. And that's
for what purpose?
For what purpose? To keep them unindustrialized, to keep them from being able to have economies like we're used to in the West.
Are we talking about South Africa? I mean, South Africa is an industrialized country.
But look what problems they've gone through recently with Eskom, the what used to be the state-owned power company. And all those issues would never have arisen had there been a second nuclear power plant built. And it was specifically this NGO, this German NGO, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, that put a stop to, they influenced public opinion to such an extent that the government never went ahead with a second nuclear power plant. So why I bring that in is to just say that whole NGO world, it's extremely powerful in what they can actually manage to achieve. But if I might just go back to Central Africa and talking about Great Lakes and Congo, I would say that to look at NGOs is a fantastic place to start. And the reason I say that is because one thing before I get onto that, if you look to understand who is influencing the NGOs, you look at who's funding them. And invariably, you will find that the funders are the big banks of Wall Street and the City of London, almost every time. So we're looking at the neoliberal economic system being the banking empire, creating the NGO industry. And interestingly enough, that whole complex is the very thing that put Paul Kagame and his administration in power in Rwanda in 1994.
We're going to get to that point shortly. But before we get to that point, I would like to ask you another question. The United Nations has maintained a presence in Eastern Congo for decades, with MONUSCO being one of its largest peacekeeping missions, in addition to agencies like UNHCR and the World Food Programme. Why have these missions fail to bring stability, is it more about sustaining the missions themselves than solving a problem?
Well, it's, if it weren't so incredibly catastrophic, it would be laughable. In fact, I would say anyone who still believes that MONUSCO are there in Eastern Congo to keep the peace is participating in the theater of the absurd. MONUSCO has been running since...
You want to say that there's no peace in the first place to be kept?
Exactly.
Okay.
So what are we even talking about? We are talking about an absurdity. For one thing, MONUSCO is the longest running occupation force, which is what it is, occupation of foreign territory, and it is also the most expensive. When I say MONUSCO has cost billions, it has cost billions and billions over the decades. And the absurdity and the actual crime lies in the fact that DRC this is the poorest, one of the poorest nations on earth. There are some of the poorest people on earth in this country. And even though it is Africa's second largest state and the DRC is vast, it has the world's largest infrastructure deficit. So you combine all of that with the billions and the billions and the billions that have been poured into this peacekeeping force, and look at the utter absurdity. All those billions, just 1 billion, what would that have done to build roads, to build railways, to get the whole Grand Inga, the fantastic hydro energy producing system of the Congo River.
You're talking about Inga Dam.
I mean, all those billions that the UN has spent on so-called keeping the peace, and it has achieved nothing. Now, Tshisekedi, President Tshisekedi requested MONUSCO vacate DRC territory, and I believe his timeline was December 2023. He asked them very, very, very diplomatically to leave. And he said that it was within Congo's own interests to protect their national sovereignty. Now, recently, the Congolese Minister of Foreign Affairs, absolutely fantastic woman, in my opinion, Madame Therese Wagner Kaikwamba, has reiterated that. And she said that, again, so diplomatically, this Kinshasa government, by the way, are incredibly well-versed in diplomacy. They're doing a great job. And she said that they have found that in the areas that MONUSCO have vacated, that they are achieving a sustainable peace. She doesn't say any more than that, but what a thing to say. You ask your average Congolese person what they make of MONUSCO, and they will tell you that MONUSCO work with M23 RDF. I must just explain, every time I mention that word, M23, I always preface it by saying M23 RDF. The two are interchangeable, RDF being Rwandan Defense Force. So, in terms of what MONUSCO has actually been doing, I would say the level of criminality is going to really shock the hell out of some people. I've had from one very credible source say that they have witnessed MONUSCO vehicles moving minerals, coltan, whatever, over the border to Rwanda. Multiple people have said that MONUSCO helicopters have dropped food and munitions behind M23 RDF lines. Very recently, the battle for Goma, Goma was overrun by M23 RDF in January this year. And there's an airport there, as I'm sure you're well aware. And the idea was to secure the airport. This is an international airport. It's very important part of logistics for the area. And there were SAMI DRC, the Congolese forces, FARDC, and MONUSCO, all there. SAMI DRC and FARDC secured the gates, shut the gates of the airport to keep it safe. They were amazed when UN peacekeepers opened the gates and let M23 RDF troops in.
Based on what you just said now, do you see a pattern where United Nations agencies, humanitarian NGOs apply similar crisis management models worldwide, creating long-term dependency rather than promoting self-sufficiency?
Well, if you mean, has this been replicated? Is this a pattern? Has it happened before? Oh my goodness, yes. It's such a clear and obvious pattern. I didn't get to it, but I wanted to say earlier that one of the key orchestrators of the 1994 genocide, the events that happened, and one of the key CIA operatives who put Paul Kagame and his administration in power was a operative called Roger Winter, who worked for USAID and the American...
What's the name again?
Roger Winter.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked for USAID and he worked for the American High Commission for Refugees, important point. Now, he has been awarded, he died last year, but he was awarded 2 medals by Paul Kagame. He's a very, very shady and interesting character within that whole scene of what went on. He appears again in Sudan. You had the partition of the Sudan and the creation of South Sudan. This was under John Garang. Roger Winter was best pals with Paul Kagame. Roger Winter was best pals with John Garang. He was there. He orchestrated the entire thing. Now, we had the whole situation of Save Darfur. You see, they created, remember, Roger Winter worked for United States High Commission on Refugees. And what they do is they make it's been described as a mini republic. I like that expression of refugees. They use refugees. They come in, they create the problem, which then as a byproduct is a mass of IDPs, internally displaced people and refugees. They then use them as pawns, and you have your MONUSCO or your UN peacekeeping missions in Cote d'Ivoire, in Somalia, in Sudan. So getting back to your question, is this replicated? Oh, it most certainly is. Another fantastic example is Cote d'Ivoire and what happened to the presidency of Laurent Gbagbo. And that was in 2010. So the UN came in and literally obliterated. And I have heard that they came in with sealed containers, and those containers had armaments in them. You see, the idea was to get rid of Kapko and install Alistan Kataro. So we can have a field day with other examples of how this operates.
So you want to say that that some international actors are interested in keeping the Great Lakes region unstable to justify continued funding, military presence, and economic control?
Well, I wouldn't say some international actors. In the case of Congo, it is the entire international community.
Wow.
So, there has been, over the entire story of Congo, the Congolese and the Rwandans, because remember, Rwandans are as much a victim of what is going on as are the people in Eastern Congo. And the silence is quite incredible. The Congolese they are so habituated to being ignored. It's only recently, with President Tshisekedi breaking that holy silence and saying it's Rwanda who are behind M23. Now that was something really, really new when he did that, and things have changed since then. But you look at the world's media, and they almost in unison perpetuate what is simply a code of lies. And why do they do it? They do it because it's an international mineral mafia. We are all dependent on the minerals from Eastern Congo. We're all dependent on the coltan and the cobalt, particularly the coltan for the digital industry. So, there's an academic called Shahid Bilson. Some of your audience may be aware of him. And I credit what I'm going to say to him, because it's he who came up with the term. And I think it's such a perfect term to use. He said that what is happening in Eastern Congo, the looting of Congo's minerals, is utopian level deregulation. And what a fantastic term, because it's exactly what it is. It's a utopian level deregulation for the City of London mining extractive industry.
We're going to get to London later. But what alternative, let me ask you, what alternative development and crisis resolution models could be implemented to break this cycle of foreign aid dependency in the Great Lakes region and elsewhere?
I love that subject. It's my passion. So I'm sure I'm not alone in being so incredibly sick to death of poverty, war, famine, malnutrition, disease in Africa. And I don't even have to put up with it. We have to say, hang on a minute, this is not being caused by climate change, or is not being caused by bad governance. It's not being caused by corruption. It is being caused by a system that has been imposed on Africa for decades. The way we get out of it, and the way we do it, is to literally build our way out of the Malthusianism, out of the neoliberal system. And we do it by building the physical economy. It's not rocket science, it's just common sense. All these years, your Harvard graduates, your Harvard economists will come out and say, oh, this is how you do it. You run an economy in this way. Or hang on a minute, that system is clearly inoperational. It has clearly failed Africa. And we must now do the transfers, which is happening. And that's the beauty of this subject. It's not a question of building future Africa. Future Africa is already here. And there's so much cause for optimism. If I could just rant on about how amazing Tanzania are doing on one of the most monumental projects that we have seen in a very, very long time, and that gets very little to no attention at all, and it is such a source of optimism for the continent, and it's the high-speed railway network. So if I can just briefly describe to you, it's 6 corridors going north-south, and then, if I remember correctly, 3 going, no, it's more than 3, 6 going east-west, and then a corridor going all the way round the coastline, designed to join capitals. So you get on a train in Cape Town, say, for instance, and you can be on that high-speed railway network all the way up the coast to Egypt.
Are you talking about that project that is being financed and built by the Chinese?
No. There are many, many people building. Motor Engel, the Turkish construction firm, Chinese, yes, the Chinese civil, can't remember, civil corporation. There are, but Yapi Makezi are one of the most efficient. They've built a lot of Tanzania's high-speed railway. Tanzania have almost finished. They've almost completed their entire section. You see, it's up to each country to build their section of the high-speed railway. Now, where this comes to Congo, which is where we need to focus, we really, really need to focus on this railway. Tanzania are at Mwanza, Lake Victoria. Now, then there's a spur in the railway. One bit goes up to Kigali in Rwanda, and then another bit goes down to Bujumbura in Burundi. They then go through their different ways. The Kigali line goes to Goma, and the Bujumbura line goes to Bukavu in eastern DRC. That then traverses this incredible great landmass of Congo, 300,000, I can never remember, but it's vast, all the way across DRC to the Atlantic. So from the Indian Ocean, you will now be traversing right through the interior, which has always been left out, to the other side, joining up with Congo-Brazzaville, Pointe-Noire. And this is going to be the most economically transformative project that could ever even have been dreamt about. And one last thing to enthuse on it, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Fantastic idea, but that will not work without the infrastructure. And if they manage to keep it high speed, they're talking about downgrading it, primarily lack of energy, lack of electricity, such a shame. But, that will, with AfCFTA, with the free trade agreement and the Continental Railway network, we're transformed, absolutely transformed. And there are many sections of that railway which are being built. One last thing on that fantastic question of yours, a subject I so enjoy, is energy. And of course, not only do African countries suffer from enormous infrastructure deficits, because of this ignoring of the physical economy by people who call themselves economists. But also African countries suffer from a chronic lack of energy. So that is now being transformed. Many, many projects. Hydro, nuclear is gaining interest by the day. It's becoming very, very popular. You see it fits in with the green thing. There's no emissions. And, you know, one last thing. Jeffrey Sachs gave a talk about 2 years ago now to the African Union. And it was a particularly optimistic, a particularly amazing talk. And he reiterated the fact that Africa, there has never been such a good time in Africa for long-term development, for long-term investment. So this is how we need to change our mindsets and say, well, instead of investing in the misery industry, let's invest in the high-speed railway and transform Africa, because it can be done. And it can be done in a very, very short space of time. This high-speed railway network, they commissioned a study, the AU. It's an Outer NEPAD project. And they commissioned a very high level railway engineer by the name of Roland Atiguba, who designed the modernized Nigerian railway network. And they commissioned him to find out the quickest way of completing at least the pilot projects of the high-speed railway, which he did. And he came up with an ingenious and incredibly simple proposal in which he said that if it were implemented, that railway, at least the pilot projects, could be completed and running in 12 to 13 years.
Well, actually, listening to you encourages me to ask you this. I think it will come across as a rhetorical question. Is this the reason why local African-led initiatives receive less funding than Western-backed NGOs?
Yes, because they solve a problem. They are personally invested. I'd love to take the opportunity to just say many people are under the apprehension that there are people in Africa, Congolese in Congo, who are like that, you know, hands open, oh, please help us with some aid, please help us with some aid, and that they're not solving their own problems. That is completely wrong, completely wrong. I can think of so many projects, ingenious and brilliantly coordinated and run projects just in Eastern Congo that are solving problems on a tiny budget. And all those organizations, those NGOs, charities, whatever, social movements, are Congolese run, they are Congolese funded. Just to give you an example, a very interesting one is a village. It's a large village, about 2,000 people in it. And a local Congolese NGO are trying to get funding for a micro hydro unit because they've got a waterfall that runs all year round, fantastic volume of water. And if they can harness the water with a micro hydro unit, they can generate enough electricity to power the whole village 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And at the moment, people rely on paraffin stoves, and they've already had numerous deaths, numerous homes burnt down because paraffin stoves lead to fires. They're very dangerous. And of course, you've got to buy the paraffin. So that's just one example. I can think of countless others. Just, you know, a maman who's looking after 43 orphans all on her own and relies on local people bringing her a bag of food or paying for one of the kids to go to school. A young student group from one of the universities in Eastern Congo. They go around, or the street kids, you know, there's so many orphans and street children in Congo, it's horrible. They go around, pay for their school fees, their secondary school fees, buy them some uniforms so that they can go to school and be dressed like the other kids. Those kind of projects are numerous. One last one, a Congolese NGO, people living in a town have got so fed up of walking through the mud because of the lack of tarmac roads in their town that they have built out of stone and cement. They've paved their roads by hand. They've built steps down because it's very mountainous, and they've built these incredibly beautiful steps going down the mountainside. And these are all local NGOs using very little money, getting a little bit from foreign sponsors, but mostly just from the community.